After surviving a brutal assassination attempt, the most feared mafia boss in the city decided to stage the ultimate test for his family. He returned home claiming to be permanently blinded, hiding his sight behind dark aviator lenses to see how his wife would treat his dying father when she thought he was helpless. He expected greed. He expected impatience. But what he witnessed within the walls of his own estate left him freezing with rage. Yet amidst the cruelty, he saw something else, a humble maid risking her life to protect the man everyone else wanted dead. The boss thought he knew who was loyal. He was wrong, and when the glasses finally come off, the punishment won't just be severe, it will be biblical. The darkness behind the sunglasses was self-imposed, but the coldness in the room was entirely real. Leander Vance, a man whose name usually cleared crowded rooms, stood uncertainly in the foyer of his ancestral estate. His hand, usually wrapped around a pistol, now gripped a white cane with a tremor that was perfectly rehearsed. To the dozens of staff members and guards watching, he was a broken lion, blinded by the car bomb that had nearly taken his life. But behind the pitch-black lenses of his aviators, Leander's eyes were sharp, focused, and hunting. He remembered the thought that had crossed his mind as he lay in the hospital bed, bandaged and aching. A wolf is only loved when he can lead the pack. Wounded, he is dinner. He had to know if Serafina, the woman who had sworn to love him in sickness and in health, was a wife or a vulture. "Leander! Oh my God, Leander!" The voice came from the top of the stairs, high, breathless, panicked. Through the tint of his glasses, Leander watched Serafina descend. She was dressed in immaculate silk, her face a mask of distraught concern. She rushed to him, her perfume clouding his senses, and threw her arms around his neck. "My poor, poor darling, I thought I'd lost you." The staff lowered their heads, touched by the display. But Leander, staring straight ahead, saw what they didn't. As Serafina hugged him, her face was pressed over his shoulder. He watched the reflection in the foyer mirror. The tears stopped instantly. Her mouth, moments ago trembling with grief, twisted upward, her sharp, angled eyebrows lifted, and a smile of pure, sinister triumph cut across her face. It was the look of a woman who had just won the lottery. There it is, Leander thought, his heart hardening into a block of ice. The real face. She pulled back, smoothing his lapels, her voice dripping with fake honey. "Come, let's get you to the chair. You must be exhausted." She guided him forward, but she moved too fast, careless of his blindness. As they passed the entryway, Leander's father, Cassius, frail, wheelchair-bound and trembling, reached out a shaking hand to greet his son. "Leo?" the old man wheezed. Serafina didn't even look down. With a subtle, brutal check of her hip, she shoved the wheelchair aside. "Move, you old useless thing," she hissed, barely audible, knocking the old man off balance. Cassius tipped dangerously. Leander's grip on his cane tightened until his knuckles turned white. He prepared to break cover, to catch his father. But a blur of movement stopped him. Beatrix Morrow, the quiet maid who usually faded into the wallpaper, lunged forward. She caught the wheelchair just before it hit the floor. Leander watched her through her dark lenses. Beatrix was nothing like his wife. Where Serafina was sharp angles and expensive silk, Beatrix was soft curves and a worn uniform. Her face, framed by loose strands of hair, was round and open, her jawline soft but set with a surprising stubbornness. Her eyes were wide with fear, but her hands were steady as she righted the old man. "Careful, ma'am," Beatrix whispered, her voice trembling but firm. She dusted off Cassius's shoulder with a tenderness that made Leander's chest ache. Serafina spun around, her eyes flashing with venom. "Did I give you permission to speak trash? Get him out of my sight, both of you." Leander stood motionless in the center of the hall, the most dangerous man in the city playing the part of the invalid. He saw the smirk on his wife's face. He saw the quiet defiance in the maid's tears. He didn't scream. He didn't strike, A predator waits for the perfect moment to kill. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to look confused and helpless. "Serafina?" he called out, feigning panic. "Is everything all right? I heard a noise." Serafina turned back to him, the demon vanishing instantly, replaced by the angel. "It's nothing, my love," she cooed, taking his arm. "Just the clumsy help. Ignore them." Leander let her lead him deeper into the house, into the trap he had set for her. "Show me everything," he vowed silently, watching Beatrix comfort his father in the background. "Show me who deserves to be the queen, and who deserves to be executed." Dinner was a theater of cruelty, and Leander had front-row seats. The dining room was dimly lit, the long mahogany table set with the family's finest silver. Leander sat at the head, staring blankly ahead through his dark lenses, though his peripheral vision was locked on the scene to his right. His father, Cassius, sat hunched over a bowl of broth, his hands trembling too much to hold the spoon steady. Serafina sat beside the old man, not to help him, but to loom over him like a hawk circling a dying mouse. "Here, let me help you, Papa," Serafina said, her voice sugary sweet for Leander's benefit. Leander watched as she picked up the heavy porcelain tureen. She didn't ladle the soup. She tipped the entire ladle aggressively, hovering it high above Cassius's bowl. Then she turned her wrist. It wasn't a slip, it was a calculated tilt. The scalding tomato bisque splashed down, missing the bowl entirely and drenching Cassius's withered hand and wrist. The old man yelped, a high, thin sound of pain that echoed off the high ceilings. "Hot! It burns!" Leander's instinct was to launch himself across the table. His hand clamped onto the edge of the table, his fingers digging into the wood with enough force to crack a walnut. He forced his face to remain slack, feigning confusion. "What happened? Is he all right?" "Oh, he's just so clumsy," Serafina sighed, grabbing a napkin and roughly scrubbing at Cassius's reddened skin, making him wince. "He knocked the ladle right out of my hand. He's becoming impossible, Leander." Before Leander could trust his voice to respond, the service door swung open. Beatrix was there in a heartbeat, a pitcher of ice water and a soft cloth in her hands, as if she had been waiting in the wings, anticipating the cruelty. She didn't speak, she simply knelt beside Cassius, gently pushing Serafina's rough hands away. With the precision of a nurse, Beatrix dipped the cloth in the cold water and laid it over the burn. Her movements were fluid and tender, her thumbs soothing the old man's knuckles. "Get away from him," Serafina snapped, her voice dropping the sweet act instantly. "You clumsy idiot, you should have set the table better. This is your fault for distracting him." Beatrix didn't argue, she didn't look up. She just kept her head bowed, absorbing the abuse so she could keep treating Cassius. "I'm sorry, madam. I'll clean it up immediately." Leander watched the contrast through the tint of his glasses. Serafina stood above them, her face twisted in a sneer, wiping a speck of soup from her silk dress as if it were toxic waste. Below her, Beatrix knelt on the hard floor, ignoring her own humiliation to keep whispering soothing words to a man who could offer her nothing. One breaks, Leander thought, the image searing into his memory. The other mends. "Leave it," Leander said, his voice low and gravelly. "Beatrix, take him to his room. Serafina, pour me some wine." He saw Beatrix cast a grateful glance toward him before wheeling Cassius away. Serafina smiled, reclaiming her seat, oblivious that the man across from her had just added the first mark to her death warrant. The living room was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock and the rattling, wet sound of Cassius trying to breathe. Leander sat in the high-backed velvet armchair near the fireplace, his face turned toward the blank wall. To anyone watching, he was a broken man lost in the dark, staring at nothing. But behind the aviators, his eyes were locked on the reflection in the glass cabinet across the room. It gave him a perfect, distorted view of the sofa, where his wife and father sat. "Time for your medicine, Cassius," Serafina announced, Her voice was pitched loud enough for Leander to hear, a performance of the dutiful daughter-in-law. "We don't want another episode like last week, do we?" Leander watched the reflection. Serafina held the orange prescription bottle in one hand and a glass of water in the other. She shook the bottle vigorously, the rattle of pills echoing through the room like dry bones. "Open up," she cooed. Cassius, pale and sweating, opened his mouth obediently. He was desperate. His chest was heaving with the effort to pull in air, his lungs whistling like a cracked kettle. Serafina tipped the bottle into her palm. Leander saw 2 small white tablets fall into her hand. "Here comes the water," she said. She brought the glass to Cassius's lips with her left hand, but her right hand, the one holding the pills, didn't move toward his mouth. Instead, with a sleight of hand that would have impressed a street magician, she closed her fist. As Cassius drank the water, gulping greedily in anticipation of relief, Serafina slid her closed fist down to her side and slipped the pills deep into the pocket of her cardigan. She pulled her hand back out, empty. "There," she said, patting Cassius's cheek with a little too much force. "All gone. You should feel better soon." Cassius swallowed the water, confusing the cool liquid for the medicine. He leaned back, closing his eyes, waiting for the tightness in his chest to loosen. But Leander knew relief wasn't coming. Cassius gasped, clutching his chest. "Still tight." "Oh, stop it," Serafina hissed, leaning in close so her voice wouldn't carry to the armchair. "I just gave you a double dose. If you're still wheezing, it's because you're weak. Stop being dramatic." Leander felt a surge of adrenaline, so potent it nearly made him nauseous. His hand twitched on his knee. He wanted to stand up, cross the room, and force her to swallow the entire bottle herself. He wanted to rip the glasses off and show her exactly what he saw. But he couldn't. Not yet. The Mafia Code, the one he had lived by his whole life, required absolute proof before a judgment. If he acted now, she would claim it was a mistake, an accident. He needed her to dig her grave so deep she could never climb out. He forced his muscles to relax, leaning his head back against the chair as if he were falling asleep. "Is he settling down?" Leander asked, his voice flat. Serafina straightened up, patting her pocket where the pills lay hidden. "Yes, darling," she called out, smiling at his blind profile. "He's resting peacefully. I'm taking such good care of him." Leander closed his eyes behind the dark lenses, listening to his father's desperate, untreated breaths, and silently added a second mark to her warrant. The house slept, but pain respected no curfew. It was 3 in the morning when Leander stood in the blackened hallway outside his father's room. He had ditched the cane and the glasses, allowing his eyes to adjust to the gloom. He moved with the silent, predatory grace that had kept him alive in the underworld, his footsteps making no sound on the plush carpet. He had intended to slip in and give his father the emergency nitroglycerin he kept hidden in his own safe, but he stopped dead before he reached the threshold. Someone else was already there. The door was cracked open a few inches, spilling a thin ribbon of amber light into the hall. Leander pressed his back against the wall, merging with the shadows, and peered through the gap. Beatrix was kneeling by the bedside, illuminated by the soft glow of a nightlight. Her uniform was rumpled, and dark circles bruised the skin beneath her eyes, but her focus was entirely on the wheezing man in the bed. "Shh, Mr. Vance," Beatrix whispered, her voice a soothing hum. I know it hurts." Cassius clutched the sheets, his face gray. "Serafina," he rasped. "She said I took them." "She lied," Beatrix said softly, a flash of anger tightening her jaw. She reached into the pocket of her apron, not the pristine white one she wore for service, but a worn one, fraying, she used for cleaning. She pulled a small white paper bag with a pharmacy logo out of her pocket, crinkling loudly in the quiet room. Leander squinted. It wasn't the prescription bottle from the expensive doctor. It was a generic box from the all-night chemist in town. "I ran out after my shift ended," Beatrix explained, uncapping a bottle of water she had brought with her. "It cost me my grocery money for the week, but don't you worry about that. It's the same formula. I checked." She carefully placed 2 pills on his tongue and helped him lift his head to drink. She stroked his sparse gray hair back from his clammy forehead as he swallowed, murmuring words of comfort until the jagged rhythm of his breathing began to smooth out. "Don't tell the mistress," Beatrix whispered, tucking the blanket around his shoulders. "She'll fire me if she knows I'm nursing you, but I won't let you suffer, not while I'm here." Leander watched from the darkness, his hands uncurling from fists into open palms. He had been looking for a traitor in his house, but in the dead of night he had found a guardian. He retreated silently down the hall, leaving the angel to her work, the image of her sacrifice burning brighter in his mind than any wealth his family possessed. The medicine had done its work. Cassius's breathing had deepened into a steady, rhythmic sleep, the terrifying wheeze replaced by a soft snore. But Beatrix didn't leave. Leander remained anchored in the hallway shadows, watching through the crack in the door. He knew he should return to his own room before dawn broke and ruined his charade, but he couldn't tear himself away. Inside the room, the scene shifted from urgent care to quiet vigil. Beatrix pulled the wooden chair closer to the bed and slumped into it, her posture collapsing from efficiency into exhaustion. The adrenaline that had driven her to the pharmacy and back finally drained away, leaving something raw and aching in its wake. In the glow of the nightlight, Leander saw a single tear spill over her lash line. It tracked slowly down her cheek, a shimmering line of silver against her pale skin. She didn't wipe it away. She reached out and took Cassius's limp hand, holding it with both of hers. "You have his hands," she whispered to the sleeping man. Her voice was thick, trembling with a grief that didn't belong to this house. "Rough palms, knuckles like old tree roots. My papa had hands just like this." Leander stiffened. He had never considered that the help had lives, histories, or fathers of their own. To him, they were just shadows that kept the estate running. Beatrix rubbed her thumb over Cassius's wrist. She confessed to the unconscious figure. "I couldn't save him, Mr. Vance. I didn't have the money for the doctors. I didn't have a job like this then. I just sat there and watched him fade, just like she's watching you." Her voice broke, and she pressed her forehead against the old man's hand. "I promised myself I'd never watch it happen again, not if I can stop it. I don't care if she fires me, I don't care if she hits me, I'm not letting you go alone." Leander felt a sensation he hadn't experienced in years, a tightness in his throat that had nothing to do with anger. He looked at the woman he had ignored for months. He had thought her servitude was born of fear or the need for a paycheck. He realized now that he was looking at penance. She was loving his father because she couldn't love her own anymore. The stern granite lines of Leander's face, usually set in a permanent scowl of command, began to fracture. His lips parted slightly, a silent exhale of awe. He raised a hand to his own chest, feeling the heavy beat of his heart. In a house filled with millions of dollars of art and gold, he had finally found the only thing of value. He watched her weep for a stranger's father, and for the first time since the assassination attempt, the darkness in Leander's world lifted just a little. Leander decided it was time to stop watching from the shadows and step into the light. He needed to know if Beatrix's kindness was reserved only for the dying or if it extended to the difficult. "You there," he barked, pointing his cane vaguely in the direction of the kitchen. "Maid, take me to the garden. This house smells of rot." Beatrix appeared instantly, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, Mr. Vance, right away." She moved to his side, offering her arm not as a crutch, but as an anchor. Leander gripped it hard, too hard. He made himself heavy, dragging his feet, feigning the clumsiness of a man who had lost his bearing. As they reached the stone steps leading to the rose garden, he intentionally hooked the tip of his cane on a crack in the pavement. He stumbled, lurching forward. Serafina would have sighed loudly. She would have said, "Watch where you're going, you clumsy oaf." Beatrix didn't sigh. She braced her stance, absorbing his weight instantly, her small frame straining but holding firm. "I've got you, sir," she said, her voice calm and steady. "It's just a small, uneven patch. The pavers have lifted with the frost. Take your time." Leander wrenched his arm away, swinging the cane wildly, decapitating a nearby tulip. "I don't need time," he roared, channeling the frustration he imagined a blinded man would feel. "I'm useless like this, a cripple in my own home." He waited for the recoil. He waited for her to shrink away or offer a hollow platitude. Instead, he felt a warm, tentative hand gently touch his clenched fist. "You are not useless, Mr. Vance," Beatrix said. Her voice wasn't fearful, it was fiercely sad. "You are just learning a new way to fight, and even the strongest soldiers stumble when the terrain changes." The words disarmed him. He froze, his chest heaving with fake exertion. He turned his head toward her voice. "Come here," he commanded, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Let me see who is lecturing me." He reached out, his hand trembling slightly. He found her shoulder, then traveled up her neck to her cheek. It was a classic move from the movies, a blind man learning a face by touch, but Leander used it to search for the truth. His rough fingertips grazed her skin. It was soft, warm, and wet. He traced the track of moisture from her cheekbone to her jaw. She was crying. She wasn't crying because he had yelled at her. She was crying because she felt his pain. "Why are you weeping, girl?" he asked, his thumb brushing away the tear. "Because it's not fair," she whispered, her voice cracking. "A man like you shouldn't have to live in the dark." Leander froze. Behind the black lenses, his eyes widened. She wasn't managing him, she was mourning with him. In a world of people who wanted his money or his power, he had found the one person who simply wanted him to be whole. "No," Leander murmured, lowering his hand. "Perhaps the dark isn't so bad. It shows you things the light hides." The shark arrived in a pinstripe suit, carrying a leather briefcase that smelled of greed. Leander sat in the corner of the study, his cane resting against his knee, ostensibly listening to an audiobook through headphones. In reality, the headphones were silent, and his hidden eyes were trained on the desk where Serafina was orchestrating the final coup. "Mr. Blackwood has prepared the papers, Papa," Serafina said, her voice brisk and businesslike. She stood behind Cassius's wheelchair, her hands resting on his shoulders like talons. "It's a simple power of attorney. With Leander, incapacitated, and your health declining, we need to secure the estate." Cassius blinked, his eyes unfocused. The medication Beatrix had given him kept the pain at bay, but it left him drifting in a fog. "I don't. Leander is right here. He can sign." "Leander is blind, Cassius," Serafina snapped, her patience fraying. She glanced at her husband with undisguised contempt. "Look at him. He can't even pour his own wine, let alone manage the syndicate's finances. If the families smell weakness, they will tear us apart. I am doing this to save us." The lawyer, Mr. Blackwood, slid a thick document across the mahogany desk. "Just here, Mr. Vance, the bottom line. It transfers all assets and decision-making powers to Mrs. Vance, effective immediately." Serafina jammed a gold fountain pen into Cassius's trembling hand. "Sign it, now." Cassius's hand hovered over the paper, shaking violently. I should read it first." "You can't read it, you're half-blind yourself," Serafina hissed, grabbing his wrist and forcing the pen tip down onto the paper. "Do it." Leander's muscles coiled. He was ready to shatter his cover, to cross the room and break Blackwood's nose, but the library doors swung open before he could move. Beatrix entered, carrying a silver tea service. She stopped dead, taking in the scene, the lawyer's predatory stance, the terrified old man, and Serafina physically forcing his hand. "Stop!" Beatrix cried out. The tray clattered onto his side table, the china rattling dangerously. Serafina whipped around. "Get out!" Beatrix didn't retreat. She marched to the desk, placing herself between the lawyer and the wheelchair. "He cannot sign that. Look at him. He is heavily medicated. He doesn't know what he's doing." "This is none of your business, servant," sneered the lawyer. "It is the law," Beatrix countered, her voice shaking but her chin high. "I gave him his morphine an hour ago. If you let him sign this, I will testify to every judge in the city that he was not of sound mind." The room went deadly silent. Serafina's face turned a mottled, ugly red. She looked from the pen to the maid, realizing that this nobody, this quiet little mouse, had just checkmated her with the truth. Leander sat perfectly still in the corner, a fierce pride burning in his chest. She wasn't just kind, she was brave, and she had just bought him the time he needed to finish this. The silence that followed Beatrix's defiance was short-lived. It shattered like glass. Serafina's controls snapped. The veneer of the sophisticated socialite dissolved, revealing the raw, ugly rage beneath. She didn't scream first, she moved. With a guttural snarl, she snatched the pen from Cassius and backhanded him across the face. The sound was sickening, a wet slap against frail skin. "You useless old corpse," she shrieked. Cassius slumped in his chair, too weak to defend himself, a trickle of blood appearing at the corner of his mouth. Beatrix cried out, throwing herself over the old man to shield him. "Don't you touch him. He's sick." "And you," Serafina turned her fury on the maid. She lunged forward, her manicured fingers tangling into Beatrix's hair. She yanked hard, wrenching Beatrix's head back, forcing her to look up into Serafina's twisted face. "You think you can threaten me? In my own house?" Serafina screamed, shaking Beatrix violently. "I am the mistress here. I own the walls, I own the money, and I own you." Beatrix gasped in pain, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't fight back. She kept one hand firmly on Cassius's shoulder, anchoring him. "You're fired," Serafina spat, her face inches from Beatrix's. "Get out, and take this dying baggage with you. I'm done waiting for him to rot. I'll throw him in the street myself and let the rats finish him off." The lawyer, Blackwood, took a nervous step back, looking pale. This was going too far, even for him. "Mrs. Vance, perhaps we should—" "Shut up," Serafina roared, not letting go of Beatrix's hair. "I run this family now. Leander is a cripple and his father is a vegetable. I am the only one left with any power." In the corner, Leander slowly removed his headphones. He placed them on the side table with deliberate care. He stood up. He didn't reach for his cane. He didn't grope for the wall. He stood to his full height, his shoulders squaring, the slump of the invalid vanishing instantly. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Is that so?" Leander said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through Serafina's screaming like a razor blade. It was deep, steady, and terrifyingly calm. Serafina froze, her hand still tangled in Beatrix's. She turned her head slowly toward the corner. Leander was facing her directly. His head wasn't tilted, his posture wasn't uncertain. Even behind the black glasses, he was radiating a lethal focus. He took one step forward, then another, moving with the silent, deadly grace of a predator that had finally decided to strike. The game was over. Leander crossed the room, the sound of his heavy boots echoing like Judgment Day on the hardwood floor. He stopped 3 feet from his wife. "I've seen enough," he said. He reached up and removed the aviator glasses. Serafina's hand went limp, releasing Beatrix's hair. She stared into Leander's eyes. They were not milky or vacant. They were dark, sharp, and burning with a cold, terrifying intelligence. They locked onto hers with the precision of a sniper scope. Leander," she stammered, her face draining of color. You can see? I never lost my sight, Serafina. I only lost my trust, and you helped me confirm why. He stepped closer, invading her space until she stumbled back against the desk. I saw you tilt the ladle. I saw you burn my father's hand because you were impatient. No, baby, that was an accident. I saw you pocket the pills. Leander cut her off, his voice rising, thundering through the library. I watched my father gasp for air while you stood there and smiled. I heard you call him a useless corpse. And then you, Blackwood, trying to coerce a medicated man. I'll have your license shredded by morning. Get out before I decide to bury you with your briefcase. The lawyer scrambled out the door without a backward glance. Leander turned back to his wife, his expression one of absolute disgust. And then there is what I didn't expect to see, Leander said, his voice softening as he looked down at Beatrix, who was still kneeling beside Cassius, trembling. I saw a woman with nothing, give everything. I saw her spend her own food money on medicine for a man who isn't her blood. I saw her take your abuse to protect him. He looked back at Serafina, his expression one of absolute disgust. She has more honor in her little finger than you have in your entire body. Leander, please, Serafina sobbed, reaching for his arm. I did it for us, for our future.
Leander caught her wrist mid-air, the same wrist that had struck his father. He squeezed until she cried out, "There is no us. You wanted the money? You can leave with exactly what you brought into this marriage. Nothing." He snapped his fingers. 2 burly guards who had been waiting outside the door stepped in. "Escort her out," Leander ordered, releasing her wrist with a shove. "She takes nothing. No jewelry, no clothes, no phone. Throw her out the front gate." "You can't do this," Serafina screamed as the guards grabbed her arms, dragging her toward the door. "I am your wife." "You are a stranger," Leander said coldly, putting his glasses back in his pocket, "and strangers don't live in my house." As her screams faded down the hallway, the room fell silent. Leander knelt down, not like a boss, but like a man humbled, and offered his hand to the maid on the floor. The silence in the Vance estate had changed. It was no longer the heavy, suffocating quiet of a tomb. It was the peaceful stillness of a sanctuary. 3 weeks had passed since the night of the storm. In the sunroom, Cassius sat in his wheelchair, not hunched in pain, but reading a newspaper, a plate of fresh fruit resting on his lap. His color had returned, the gray pallor replaced by the flush of recovery. Beatrix was dusting the hallway when the summons came. One of the new guards, a respectful man who nodded at her, told her the boss requested her presence in the main office. She wiped her hands nervously on her apron. Old habits died hard. She still expected to be reprimanded for a missed spot or a loud footstep. She knocked on the heavy oak double doors. "Enter," came the deep, commanding voice. Beatrix pushed the door open. Leander was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, bathed in the morning light. He wasn't leaning on a cane. He wasn't wearing the dark aviators. He stood tall, his posture military straight, radiating the raw power that made him the most feared man in the city. He turned as she entered, his dark eyes clear and focused. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Beatrix asked, lowering her gaze. "Close the door, Beatrix, and stop looking at the floor. You are not a servant in this room." She lifted her head, surprised by the softness in his tone. Leander crossed the room, stopping just inches from her. He looked different. Dangerous, yes, but the harsh lines of cruelty that usually defined his face were gone. "My father walked a few steps today," Leander said. "He told me it was because you promised him you'd bake a cherry pie if he made it to the window." Beatrix managed a small, shy smile. "He has a sweet tooth. It's a good motivator." "You saved his life," Leander said, his voice dropping an octave. "I had the power, the money, and the guards, but I couldn't see the poison right in front of me. I played blind to find the truth, but you were his eyes when I couldn't use mine. You saw his pain when everyone else looked away." He reached out, taking her rough, work-worn hand in his. His grip was warm and solid. I fired the woman who held the title of mistress of this house, Leander continued, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. The position is vacant, but I don't want another socialite. I don't want someone who loves the money. I want the woman who loved the man. Beatrix's breath hitched. Mr. Vance, what are you asking? I'm asking you to retire the uniform, Beatrix, he said, holding her gaze with intense sincerity. I don't need a maid. I need a wife. I need a partner who has a heart pure enough to balance my darkness. Tears pricked her eyes again, but this time they weren't born of fear. She nodded, unable to speak, and Leander raised her hand to his lips, sealing the promise not with a contract, but with a kiss. They walked out of the office together, not as master and servant, but as equals. They went to Cassius's room where the old man looked up and smiled, seeing his son and the woman who had saved them both standing hand in hand, finally ready to build a home instead of just a fortress.